guys, I was doing some work on Jeff Kempin's Telefunken here, and I thought I'd just turn the camera on. As you can see, I've made some progress. I've actually been picking away at it here and there throughout the summer. Been really busy traveling for work and stuff, so I haven't had much time for hobbies in general, let alone this guy. So, but every now and then I was able to put 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, and do one or two things. One of the things I did was talk to Jeff and just kind of talked about electrical safety and things. And one of the things about old tube equipment is just they never grounded anything. There was no earth ground. You know, your power outlets in your house only had 2 prongs, so they weren't really worrying about that kind of stuff. But now we think more about that stuff, and especially with older equipment, what can happen is, especially in the power transformer, the insulation breaks down with age, and you can actually get one of the windings to short to the core of the transformer, and that'll actually energize the whole chassis of whatever piece of equipment it is with whatever voltage that happens to be. It could be a few volts, it could be hundreds of volts, it could be even thousands of volts in some cases. And what's interesting is sometimes the equipment will keep working because it sometimes doesn't even care, depending how the ground is set up internally. But this thing's pretty safe as far as the front panel goes. It's got plastic knobs, a glass panel, plastic buttons. So if that ever did happen, no one on the front would ever get harmed, or at least not very likely. But if anyone ever touched any of the chassis, or like pulled the knob off and touched the post, they would get zapped. So what I usually do is put a grounded plug on it instead. So yeah, I talked to Jeff. This is the original power inlet. It's a 2-prong guy, and the way it works is the whole back panel of the radio has the cord attached to it with a couple of rivets, and it just plugs right into this thing. So when you pull the back panel off, you cut power to it. Kind of a safety feature, but in order to put a grounded cable on here, I had to remove this, and it means that Jeff's going to have to do a little carving on his back panel, but he was fine with it, so that's what we did. So what I did was drilled the rivets out of that guy, made a little bracket. Here, I'll take you out of the stand. I don't want to turn the chassis around right now. I got it all hooked up with some stuff. So there's the power inlet right there. It's just your standard 3-prong IEC, the same thing on your computer. I had to make a little bracket here because this guy was a little wider than the original one, so I had to knock that tab off and make a new tab. So a little piece of steel here and riveted that guy in, and then it's that green wire down there is the ground, and it goes to a screw that's right on the transformer bracket here. And then the hot side goes to the fuse, and the neutral side goes to the switch. Ideally, and I would have wired it differently. I kept the original wiring. They had one leg going to the switch and the other to the fuse. I mean, it would be better to go fuse, switch, transformer, and then neutral to transformer. But at least this way the hot side is fused. So that's better than nothing. So now if the transformer ever did short, or any other wiring shorted to the chassis, it would conduct through the ground, through your house, at a really high current and blow this fuse, which is what you want, exactly what you want. So if this thing mysteriously blows a fuse, that's one of the possible reasons why it could happen. Let's see, what else? Oh, power distribution. Originally, I'll put you back in the stand. Originally it was done with this guy, which is, I think this was probably put in by the factory that built the console, the whole big cabinet, not the guys who built this, because they had a couple pieces of lamp cord. One was right on the power outlet, power socket, and the other was attached back here to the switched output. So I think what they did was, and then both go to this little terminal block right here. So I'm guessing the switch side went to the FM demodulator, or demultiplexer rather, this guy. So that would turn on when you turn the unit on, and then the unswitched one I'm assuming was for the turntable, because the turntable probably had its own power switch when you move the tone arm or whatever. So instead of this, especially since I was going, more safe electric, whatever, I decided to just cut up an extension cord and wire it right to the switch side. So now it's got 3 outlets that are switched and fused. One obviously will be for the demultiplexer, and then another would be for the turntable one. So Jeff just needs to put like a hardware store plug on the turntable once he gets it all installed, and just plug it right in, and then it should turn on with the stereo. Speaking of the demultiplexer, I replaced that big old can capacitor with a couple of modern caps, and I replaced the little electrolytic over here. It was one of those old paper wrapped wax buried types. It measured okay, but it's really old, so it's just a couple in caps, so I went ahead and just swapped it out. There's no harm in doing that. And as you can see, it now has a grounded cable on it as well. And then I'll just plug right in. So that takes care of that. I tested it. Voltages all look good. Working just fine. Sorry, my phone's beeping. And so yeah, if you remember where we left off, I had the amp section working. I was playing a CD. The AM receiver worked, but the shortwave and the FM were not working. They were totally dead. I was getting nothing out of them. So I did a little poking around. I'm not actually exactly sure at what point it started working. I think it had to do with all the switches. There's these piano key type switches move these huge sliders, and there's like a ton of contacts, and they do all kinds of crazy stuff in the circuit and reconfigure things to be an AM receiver or an FM receiver. Hit those with the oxide again, and just really cycled them a bunch of times, and started measuring voltages around, and at some point everything started working, and then I kind of went back, and I'm pretty sure it was the switches, because there was really nothing else I could find that was wrong. So that's all working. One thing I did find that was kind of amusing, I was just putting this knob on, and that's why I started filming. Here, I'll take you out the stand again. So if you look, there's a couple of contacts in there. And when I took this thing apart originally, I noticed that there was a brass ring on the center, and both contacts were touching this center ring. And I thought it was very odd. It made no sense, but I just kind of dismissed it for that moment in time, because I just moved on. I was more concerned with other things. But as I was assembling it, I was like, what is this? I was trying to figure out where in the circuit it was, and it shows up as the AFC switch. And that kind of makes sense, because this thing has buttons on it. But what doesn't make sense is that both were contacting the same ring. It's like the switch wouldn't do anything. And what I realized was this outer ring that you now see, it was so corroded, it was the same color as the plastic. I couldn't even see it. It was just brown all the way around, and neither contact was touching it. They were both touching the inner ring. So I'm guessing that either someone else was in here. I mean, I was just looking at the way it was aligned, and I don't know. Just judging by the fact that there was like no evidence of any contact on this outer ring, I have a feeling that it was like that from the factory, and it was never installed correctly. What this button does is when you're tuning the FM is kind of touchy. When you lock onto a station, the circuit in your radio, due to thermal changes and whatever, can slowly drift, and you'll slowly lose the station. And so they fix that with a thing called AFC, automatic frequency control. But when you're changing the station, you don't want AFC on, and AFC can fight you a little bit when you're trying to dial it in. So they have it set up so that when you grab the knob, it closes a switch that disables AFC, so that when you're tuning FM, AFC is off, and you're locking it in, and then you let go, and it locks on that station. So it's kind of a cool little setup they did there, but I don't know that it ever was hooked up right. Anyway, it's hooked up now. I had to bend these tabs so that one was touching one and one was touching the other. They weren't even close. They were both perfectly centered on there. It's very odd. So anyway, yeah, let me button this thing up, and we'll fire it up one more time and see, check everything out. Alright, I got her all buttoned back up. Most of the meters disconnected. I just have this one meter on there. There's a resistor right here. It's the first leg in the power supply. There's a pretty big drop across it, and it gets pretty dang hot. It was starting to smell a little bit, so I was just measuring the voltage across it to make sure I'm within spec on it. I had to replace it. The old one was all... I can show you what the old one looked like. It's all the epoxy coating or whatever coating they had on there was all cracked, and it's a wire wound, and yeah, it was open. There was no current flowing through that guy. It may have acted like a fuse, protecting something. That's one thing that it can do. So this one's a lot smaller physically, but it's actually a 5 watt instead of a 4 watt. So I was just measuring how much voltage is just across it so we can calculate how much power it's dissipating. And it seems like 2 watts is kind of where it maxes out. FM is the most demanding of the modes. But let's see. So let's go to AM. Make sure everything still works after getting it all back together. Got the demultiplexer hooked up again. Tubes are lighting up. Oh, I'm in tape mode. Here's AM. There we go.
0% interest for an entire year on a
that's right. That's AM 780. It's right where it should be, about 780. It's correct on the dial, so this thing is still aligned pretty good on the AM side. Shortwave. So I'm not going to get anything on shortwave because I don't have a shortwave antenna at this house anymore. But we can listen to Wi-Fi and various other garbage signals. Seems like it's doing something. May or may not be working. I'm probably not going to test it any more than that. Shortwave 1. It sounds like we're almost picking up something. Yeah, for shortwave you just need a really, really long wire, just like strewn off your house or something. And you can actually pick up, there's still some people transmitting on shortwave. There's like Cuba and China and Russia are still transmitting propaganda. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, let's try FM.
Our activation fee, taxes, charges.
Try to find a station I recognize because I didn't test it with the glass on here, so I have no idea if it lines up with the numbers correctly. That's country. That's 99.5. So that's right before 100. That's right on. See if we can find a strong station. I got a little dipole antenna connected here, and I'm in the basement, so I have very little signal. So it's actually doing pretty good considering.
Will win a trip of a lifetime to Singapore. Street food scene, just like me.
Savings are a mail-in rebate. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
Save big money in Menards.
Save big money. All right, cool. Still working.
Now through Sunday.
Well, I think my journey with this thing is done. I have many other projects that I need to get to. There's still more that could be done to this thing. I imagine. Like I said, I haven't checked the shortwave stuff out. I don't know if Jeff cares. There's one thing that's a little screwy. Is the equalization. Like when I turn the volume all the way up, it doesn't have much treble until I go all the way up. Even in the solo mode. I don't know if I wired something incorrectly on the volume knob. I checked it again, it seemed right, but I don't know. Maybe that's just how it is. The other thing too could be that the impedance of these speakers is probably way wrong, so it may sound correct in the cabinet with the correct speakers attached. So anyway, yeah, that was an interesting project. Yeah, you can see I got 50 volts across this 1K resistor, so I think that works out to what? 2 something watts? I forget. 2.5 watts. So it's a 5-watt resistor, so it's about half. Should be fine. So yeah, it may smell a little funny from my fingerprints all over everything. I wiped off all the tubes. These tubes get really hot, the amplifier tubes, but they should be pretty good now. So yep, that's it. I think I'm done with this thing. It's time to turn it back to its rightful owner. Have some thoughts about that, so we'll see how that plays out. So whenever I post this video, Jeff, thanks for the little project. I hope you're happy. I hope you enjoy it. Alright, so there it is, all tucked away in a box I found that's about the right size. I made a couple little 2x4 platforms for it to sit on. There's components that stick out from the bottom of the chassis, so I don't want it sitting on the bottom. So I just notched a couple pieces of wood so that they would kind of sit in there, and just put a couple screws to kind of hold it. Actually, let me see, I'm going to slide this over. Find a piece of wood here. There we go. That should hold. Alright, so there's the demultiplexer. Got some bubble wrap. Should be good. Another piece of bubble wrap will stick right here. Protect that stuff. Some bag of all the parts I took out for posterity, or okay, some of those tubes are still. I mean, there's potentially some life in them, so might be good for the future. And I've got the cables, power cable, and the 2 audio cables I made, spare fuse, and the manual which he gave me. Let's see here. Oops, sorry. Maybe a little bump there. Alright, I think that's everything. Just put some bubble wrap over that and some packing material. Get it back to its rightful owner. I'm not going to ship this, I'm just going to kind of make it look like it's shipped. There we go. I got VCLT, this side up. I hope he doesn't flip it over, I hope he reads the warnings, and yeah, let's see what happens. Hopefully he won't have any problems installing it. Alright, so good luck, Jeff. See you on the flip side.